Miami heat was different from Albuquerque. Denser, heavier. But tonight, Dexter Morgan's mind was clear. His research was done. His target was chosen. And he was ready. Walter White, the name alone carried weight in the underworld. A high school chemistry teacher turned meth kingpin. His rise had been as improbable as it was terrifying. The media called him Heisenberg. Dexter just called him a monster. Batista had first mentioned the blue meth epidemic creeping into Miami, but it was Deborah who put the pieces together. DEA reports from Hank Schrader detailed a violent empire built on corpses, Gus Fring, Gail Bodeker, the cartel, a kid on a bike. Dexter read each case file like scripture, noting the patterns. Walt wasn't just a drug dealer, he was a killer, a man who made death a currency. Dexter had seen men like him before, methodical, ruthless, brilliant. They always thought they were untouchable, but no one was untouchable. Dexter had begun his usual process, tracking, following, watching. Walt was careful. He stuck to a routine, stayed low, but habits betrayed men, and Walter was no exception. Then came the complication. Mike Ehrmantraut, a shadow in the night, tailing Dexter as surely as Dexter tailed Walt. The moment Dexter noticed, his pulse quickened. It wasn't fear, it was excitement. This game had two hunters. Dexter sat in his car across from a cheap motel in Miami, watching the door to Walter White's room. The old man was cautious. He never stayed in one place for long. The motel was one of many, likely one of several escape routes planned in advance. But Dexter had time. He always did. His dark passenger stirred as he scrolled through his notes. Every victim Walt had left in his wake was another whisper in the back of Dexter's mind, urging him forward. Crazy 8, strangled in a basement. Tuco Salamanca, shot. The nameless dealers he crushed beneath his car. Gail Boiticher, executed in his own apartment. Victor poisoned children, a burned nursing home full of bodies. This wasn't just a drug dealer cleaning up loose ends. Walt killed with purpose, out of arrogance, out of necessity. That made him different from Dexter. Or did it? Dexter exhaled. He pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. Walt fit the code. That was all that mattered. But then, the hair on the back of Dexter's neck stood up. A feeling, the same one he gave his own prey before the kill. He was being watched. Carefully, subtly, Dexter adjusted his mirror. A car parked half a block away. A man in the driver's seat, barely visible in the dim light. Older, bald, with an expression like carved stone. Mike Ehrmantraut. Dexter had seen him before. A ghost hovering around Walt. A man who understood how to disappear. But this time, Mike wasn't watching Walt. He was watching him. Dexter's pulse didn't spike, didn't race. But his dark passenger grinned. He had been made. Mike Ehrmantraut had been doing this longer than Dexter had been alive. He had a cop's instincts, a criminal's patience, and the kind of steady nerves that came with putting men in the ground for decades. So when he noticed some guy in a button-up and khakis tailing Walt, he got curious. And when that same guy was at Walt's next motel, parked half a block away, Mike knew something was off. Mike wasn't a man of many words, but he trusted his gut. He made a call. "You got a tail," he told Walt over the phone. A pause, then Walt's voice, low and measured. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, and I don't think he's a cop." Another pause. Mike could practically hear the wheels turning in Walt's head. "Find out who he is," Walt said, "and deal with it." Mike hung up and sighed. He was getting too old for this shit. Dexter adjusted his routine, switched up his routes. He knew the signs. Mike was closing in. It became a deadly chess match. One night, Mike followed Dexter to his apartment. The next, Dexter trailed Mike to a warehouse near the docks. They were circling each other, waiting for the other to slip. Dexter considered his options. Mike wasn't the target, but he was a problem, a big problem. Then one night, Mike made his move. Dexter entered his apartment, shutting the door behind him, only to freeze. A silhouette in the living room, a gun steady in its grip. Mike, calm, unshaken, staring at Dexter like he was already a corpse. Dexter smiled. "You let yourself in," he said casually. Mike didn't smile back. "You're not a cop," he said. "So that means you're something worse." Dexter tilted his head. "Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you." A pause. The tension in the air was thick, humming like a live wire. Mike exhaled through his nose. "Tell me why I shouldn't kill you right now." Dexter's mind raced. He had no weapon, no plan, but he didn't need one. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Because I'm after the same man you are?" That gave Mike pause. Dexter pressed on. "Walter White is dangerous. You know it. I know it. But I don't want his empire, and I don't want his money. I just want him." Mike studied him, his pistol still pointed at Dexter's head. "So what? You kill him? Satisfy your own sick little urges? Did you think about what happens next? You leave a power vacuum. More blood gets spilled." Dexter smirked as he inched closer to Mike. "He poisoned a child. What if it was your granddaughter?" Without warning, Mike struck. The old man was quicker than Dexter expected. In a single motion, he stepped forward, bringing the butt of his pistol down toward Dexter's temple. Dexter barely twisted in time. The gun struck his shoulder instead, a flash of pain shooting through his arm. He staggered back, his mind already calculating. Mike was stronger than he looked, but Dexter was younger, faster. Mike swung again. This time, Dexter moved first. He grabbed Mike's wrist, twisting the gun away, but Mike countered, driving a knee into Dexter's ribs. Dexter gasped as pain flared in his side, but he didn't let go. They struggled, two predators locked in a desperate fight. Mike was a professional killer, but Dexter had something else, a lifetime of carefully honed instincts, sharpened by his dark passenger. With a sudden burst of strength, Dexter twisted the gun free, sending it clattering across the floor. Mike grunted but didn't falter. He drove an elbow into Dexter's throat. Dexter choked, falling back, gasping for air. Mike moved for the gun. Dexter saw his opening. He lunged, quickly removing his belt from his pants. Before Mike could react, Dexter looped it around his throat and pulled. Mike's hands flew to the belt, his fingers clawing at the leather as he fought for air. He staggered, kicking, struggling, but Dexter held firm, his muscles burning. It took longer than usual. Mike was strong, determined. He wasn't afraid, but in the end, he was still human. His body went limp. The fight was over. Dexter released the wire, stepping back, his heart pounding. Mike Ehrmantraut lay motionless on the floor of Dexter's apartment. Did he fit the code? Dexter stared at the body, his breath uneven. He had killed countless men before. He had never hesitated, but something about this one felt unsatisfactory. Mike had killed. That was undeniable. But had he done it out of cruelty, out of compulsion, or was it just business? Dexter closed his eyes, the voices in his mind whispering. What would Harry say? Would he approve, or would he tell Dexter that he had crossed the line? He exhaled. What was done was done. Dexter took one last look at Mike before getting to work. It was going to be a long night, and there was still one more kill to make. Walter White's eyelids fluttered open. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Sharp, stinging, smelling salts, ammonium, water, ethanol. Walter felt a rush. He knew the ammonium caused a stimulant-like effect by causing more oxygen to rush to the brain. The second thing he noticed was the plastic. It was everywhere. His arms, his legs, his chest, wrapped tight in layers of plastic wrap, pinning him to a table. He was naked, exposed, helpless. His breathing quickened. Then he saw him, a man standing over him, calm, expressionless. Walter swallowed. Who the hell are you? Dexter tilted his head. You already know. Something in Walt's gut twisted. You've been watching me, he said. His voice was hoarse, dry. Yes. Walter's mind raced. He tested the restraints. Tight. No way out. But this couldn't be happening. He was Heisenberg. He was the danger. He was the one who knocked. And now nobody had him like this? This is a mistake, Walt said, his voice growing cold. You don't know who you're dealing with. Dexter reached into a duffel bag and pulled out a stack of photos. He held up the first one. Crazy 8, then another. Tuco Salamanca, Jane Margolis, Gail Bedecker, Victor, Brock. Then the boy, Thomas Cantillo. Walt's chest tightened. Dexter's voice was eerily calm. "You've killed a lot of people, Walter." Walter's eyes darkened. "You don't know anything." Dexter stepped closer and pressed his index finger against Walter's forehead. "I know everything." Walt's lips pressed into a thin line. His mind raced. Fear morphed into denial. Then anger. Then something else. Understanding. This man was like him. A killer. They weren't so different, were they? "You're no better than me," Walt whispered. Dexter didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I have a code." Walter laughed, bitter and humorless. "A code? You think that makes you righteous?" Dexter used a scalpel to cut Walter's right cheek, carefully collecting the blood onto a glass slide. Dexter's expression didn't change. "Keeps me alive. And I'd never hurt kids. Never kids." Silence. Walter closed his eyes. He knew he had lost. When he opened them again, his face was calm. "I built an empire," he murmured. "I won." Dexter nodded. "And now it's over." The knife gleamed in the dim light. Walter White took one last breath. Dexter plunged the blade into his chest. Blood blossomed across the plastic. And the great Heisenberg was no more. Dexter Morgan sat on his boat, slice of life, tossing trash bags into the abyss, staring at the endless stretch of ocean before him. The waves lapped gently against the hull, a stark contrast to the storm that raged within him. Walter White was gone. Heisenberg was a ghost. And yet, Dexter didn't feel the satisfaction he usually did after a kill. The ritual had been the same. Plastic wrap, a careful display of evidence, a confession coaxed from the condemned before the final, swift stroke of justice. But something about Walter had lingered, clawed at the edges of Dexter's mind, even after the blood had been washed away. Walter had looked at him with something deeper than fear in those last moments. He had understood him, and that was the part Dexter couldn't shake.